In Australia, there's a man named Andy who experiences difficulty socializing with other people when greeting them. This happens because they find it hard to trust others nowadays. Some of them even draw their pistols out of fear, and eventually, Andy feels resigned. Why does this happen? Because a zombie virus outbreak has spread throughout Australia, and only a handful of humans remain alive in this post-apocalyptic world full of zombies. Some of them can no longer meet their own needs, causing the collapse of trust between one another. For the past 3.5 months, Andy and his family have struggled to survive by sailing on a boat. Although staying on the boat is a very safe choice, the main challenge is finding food. One day, Andy finds an abandoned cruise ship, and he decides to go there to investigate whether the ship still has food. To avoid potential danger, he carefully checks the interior using a mirror. Andy goes to the cabin after making sure nothing is wrong. And fortunately, he finds a large amount of food sufficient to survive on the boat for several months. However, when he starts feeling comfortable with it, suddenly there's a noisy sound inside the room. However, Andy doesn't think much about it and returns to the boat carrying a box full of supplies. But he is so careless that he doesn't know his wife, named Kay, is in great danger as a result of his actions. Kay secretly goes to the overturned cruise ship while her husband is sleeping to get other supplies. This happens because her husband has already found food on the ship, so Kay goes there with the intention of taking more. As a direct consequence of this, there is now additional noise inside the room. Unfortunately, it is too late for Kay to turn around and leave, and finally, one zombie comes out to catch her. Andy isn't sure how long he has been asleep when the sound of his daughter Rosie's crying wakes him up. When he finds bloodstains on the floor, just as he is about to go to Kay while carrying his daughter, Andy immediately gets a bad feeling, and he knows something bad has happened. When Andy opens the bathroom door, he finds that his wife has been bitten by a zombie on her leg and is treating her wounds, and eventually, the husband becomes frightened. So Kay takes out a countdown bracelet and puts it on her hand, aiming to set a countdown of 48 hours before turning into a zombie. But Andy doesn't panic. Therefore, he starts packing his things. Because the map released by the government shows that there are aid posts established on the mainland, there's a possibility that these posts contain vaccines for the zombie virus. The family doesn't waste time and immediately departs, but the mainland is a much more dangerous environment than a fishing boat, so they must remain alert at all times. Fortunately, they don't need to walk far before finding a car. However, when Andy finishes refueling, Kay sees one zombie approaching. She intends to warn Andy, but Kay is afraid of being caught if she makes a sound. Therefore, all she can do is activate the turn signal. When Andy sees it, he immediately understands what his wife wants to convey. He rushes back to the car just as the zombie is about to attack him, and eventually he and Kay manage to escape. However, Kay finds that a large amount of zombie blood has come out of her wound shortly after they escape, and this is the early stage of Kay's transformation into a zombie. So she wants to get out of the car and stay away from her loved ones as soon as possible. Andy has no choice but to pull over after seeing his wife so overwhelmed with emotion. Therefore, Andy gets out of the car to follow her. Kay is aware of her impending death, but Andy is still determined not to give up, so he forces his wife to get back into the car. They continue driving toward their destination so that his wife doesn't do something unthinkable. However, while continuously looking at his wife with anxious feelings, an accident happens when Andy suddenly sees someone in the middle of the road. Therefore, Andy reflexively yanks the steering wheel to avoid them, and eventually the whole family has an accident by crashing into a tree. Rosie is still fine, but not Kay, who turns out to have been pierced by a tree branch in her stomach, while Andy loses consciousness due to the impact. When he regains consciousness after some time, he sees a message that Kay made on the car door that means "save her," and the her she refers to as Rosie. His wife's face is already covered with zombie blood, and then it doesn't take long for her to rise, and eventually she transforms into a zombie. Andy intends to calm the frightened Rosie, but in his attempt, his zombie wife moves toward him, and eventually, Andy gets bitten. Andy walks back to the car after helping Rosie out of the car, because Andy must end his wife's suffering and cannot let others do it. And finally, his wife dies. After running out of all his options, Andy sits in despair, and finally, he screams as loud as he can. He once thought about going with his wife, but for the sake of Rosie, who is only a few months old, Andy cannot give up just like that. As a result, he decides to remove the watch from his wife's hand and wear it himself. Then, after setting the countdown to 48 hours, Andy's adventure begins to take Rosie to a safe place. because before turning into a zombie, Andy must entrust Rosie to someone else whom Andy trusts completely. When Andy keeps walking, Rosie doesn't stop crying. So Andy uses his wife's old perfume and sprays it around them. Once she smells it, Rosie stops crying. However, at that moment, Andy recognizes the person who blocked the car earlier. It turns out to be a zombie. However, when Andy wants to take a branch to finish off the zombie, a girl intervenes and stops him. She then deliberately cuts her own palm, so the zombie smells it, and it follows the scent of that blood and follows the girl. Andy then continues to walk in the direction shown by the map to the aid post, and when it's about to get dark, he finally arrives safely at his destination. But this location is very different from what he expected, and once inside, this place is very dark, and there seems to be no one there. However, when he looks around, he suddenly sees a woman named Etta sitting in a corner. After examining the wound on Andy's arm, Etta gives him basic bandages and tells him that this location no longer functions as an aid post. Because of how quickly the zombie virus spreads, the government decided to end this mass relief operation long ago. Andy initially intends to entrust Etta to take care of Rosie, but Andy changes his mind after seeing Etta remove the wig from her head, and he abandons his intention after learning that Etta is undergoing treatment and apparently suffers from incurable disease. The next day, Andy says goodbye to Etta and continues his journey while carrying Rosie on his back. During his journey, Andy finds a large number of zombies with their heads buried in the ground. But once Andy moves away, those zombies rise again. When he considers the possibility of driving an empty car, he doesn't realize that the truck owner named Vic is near him. Suddenly, Vic shoots the zombie behind Andy with a rifle. But not long after that, a horde of zombies comes after hearing the gunshot, while Vic cannot free himself from the hole. So he asks Andy for help. Andy immediately gets into the car after taking Vic's car keys, then starts the process of rescuing Vic by pressing the gas pedal, and eventually, they get away from the zombies before they can chase them. After that, Vic takes Andy to a gas supply place where he and his wife, Lorraine, live together, and apparently, both of them have a positive relationship with each other. When Vic finally returns, the first thing he does is give a necklace to Lorraine. However, strangely, Vic immediately leaves just like that, and Lorraine puts down the necklace because she seems to dislike the necklace. Andy is confused while sitting to rest, until Vic invites him out to show him the view. Eventually, Andy has no choice but to hand Rosie over to Lorraine. However, Andy doesn't expect that Vic will teach him about how to improve his shooting skills. It seems as if something attracts a large number of zombies to the cage in front of him, and with guidance from Vic, Andy quickly exterminates all the zombies, and finally they die. However, Andy doesn't expect that the girl who was with the zombie earlier, named Thumi, has been detained inside the cage when Andy gets closer. While taking care of Rosie, Lorraine is surprised when she learns that Rosie has been exposed to zombie blood from Andy. Lorraine immediately understands, but she decides not to speak and starts washing Rosie's clothes and hanging them to dry. Not long after that, Andy returns, and at that time, he realizes that Lorraine already knows that Andy is infected with the zombie virus. Compared to Vic, it turns out Lorraine is a good person, so Andy feels comfortable in trusting Rosie to her care. Andy makes a decision about what to do at dawn, then he leaves Rosie, and eventually he goes outside the house alone after saying goodbye. Andy prepares to do something unthinkable using a syringe that has been provided by the government. But before he can do it, Lorraine comes unexpectedly while carrying Rosie. Lorraine knows everything Andy has done, including the truth that he is already infected with the zombie virus. However, when Andy asks for Lorraine's help, Lorraine answers that she cannot take care of Rosie. Lorraine reveals that she and Vic are not a married couple, and actually, Vic has killed her real husband, so Lorraine suggests that Andy take Rosie away from this location. Andy becomes more convinced about Vic's character after hearing this, and after observing Vic's actions throughout the day, eventually Andy doesn't go through with that stupid act. Suddenly, Andy remembers the family he met at the river earlier, and because they have 2 daughters, he decides to take Rosie there to try and see if they're willing to raise her. However, before he can finish talking, Vic appears out of nowhere, then hits Andy's head, and eventually, Andy loses consciousness. After regaining consciousness, he finds that he has been imprisoned together with Thumi. So Andy looks for a way to get out of here, while the zombies are heading in this direction. Andy gets an idea when he sees a piece of meat hanging in the cage. Therefore, he ties it with a rope and then throws it forward, so the zombies scramble to eat that meat while opening the iron door. Andy and Thumi manage to escape from inside using this method, and they run to the gas supply place from there. Secretly, they enter the room to wake up Lorraine while she is sleeping, then continue to pick up Rosie, and eventually, they're ready to go. They can leave the room without Vic waking up, but eventually, he realizes that Andy and the others have escaped, so Vic prepares with his rifle. Vic fires a shot as soon as Lorraine extends her hand to try to stop him from shooting, so Lorraine gets hit by his bullet, and finally she dies. Andy has no choice but to escape from Vic's other attacks until Andy and Thumi hide in a cave. Not long after Vic leaves, Andy and Thumi are forced to wait until dawn breaks and then leave. However, Thumi wakes up from her sleep due to an unknown sound in the middle of the night, and when she turns on a flashlight, she sees that Andy is licking blood that is spilled on the stone wall, and eventually, it's just a matter of time before he turns into a zombie. Andy returns to his normal self when dawn arrives, and he, along with Rosie, continues the journey with Thumi. However, when they pass a tree, Thumi stops. She reveals that the yellow-clothed zombie with her is her father, and he has been sentenced to death by his own tribe and then buried here. After Thumi finishes praying to her father, Andy continues the journey in a hurry, but not long after, Andy starts feeling sick. At this point, there are only 9 hours left before he completely turns into a zombie. Andy eventually goes into a coma and loses consciousness on the ground after struggling hard to maintain his life. But after resting, Thumi appears to have secured Rosie, and then they continue the journey to their destination. It is difficult for Andy to find the family he is looking for, but when he finds them, he sees that the husband is digging a grave for himself and his family. But when Andy talks to the husband, Andy realizes that there is a zombie that has also bitten the husband on the neck. Initially, Andy intends to entrust Rosie to that family, but Andy never anticipated that this would happen. The husband gives Andy 2 bullets and suggests that he do something unthinkable to Rosie and himself, so he doesn't have to suffer anymore in this world. And he doesn't think twice about going in the opposite direction, and after he leaves, he realizes the terrifying gunshot sound that comes from the direction where he retreated. The man first shoots and kills his own family, before he does something unthinkable to himself, and finally he dies. Andy seizes the gun from the man and sits silently, thinking about doing something unthinkable too, but a call from Rosie makes his current thoughts disappear. And finally, Andy doesn't go through with that stupid act once again. Thumi brings Rosie to Andy, telling him that her tribe members are not too far away, and asks whether he wants to accompany her on a journey. Andy agrees to go with her, and Andy is given a new reason to have hope from Thumi's words. That is, if Andy can give Rosie to their tribe, it will be the best choice with them raising her, and eventually they depart without delay. When they enter a railway tunnel, they find that a large number of zombies are gathered inside. Thumi states that those zombies are resting because they prefer dark places like zombies buried in the ground, so it would be better not to disturb them. However, when they're about to exit the tunnel, Andy and Thumi don't expect that Vic is there. Vic seems to have found something and walks slowly toward the side of the tunnel, while Andy tells Thumi and Rosie to be quiet in the car so Andy can get Vic's attention by going to the back of the car and shouting his name. Then Andy quickly hides among the crowd of zombies, but Vic immediately starts killing zombies to find Andy. Andy, however, has reached a point where he is ready to fight back and shoot Vic. However, unfortunately, it turns out the shot doesn't hit his vital parts. In return, Andy falls to the ground, and Vic can find both children in the car. Vic drops Thumi to the ground, beats her, and then carries Rosie. Andy tries to get back up, and when he finds Vic, it turns out he is not hurting Rosie. It is known that Vic suffered serious injuries from the gunshot wound, and in the last moments of his life, he eventually made a decision to show mercy. Thumi is also fine, and when they continue the journey, Andy starts losing consciousness, but quickly gets back up when he sees zombie blood covering his entire face. In an effort to keep himself awake, he keeps wiping that blood with his hands. The sight of rotting flesh beside him makes him unable to control his appetite, but when Andy looks at Rosie, he gets an idea. He decides to take some carrion, and after walking for some time, Andy immediately stops when he realizes that he is about to fall, then secures the carrion to a tree branch and tells Thumi that Andy will soon turn into a zombie. Andy gives his remaining strength to Rosie before saying goodbye, and then carries her on his back. In addition, Andy ties his hands with strong bonds and puts something solid in his mouth, so he cannot hurt them intentionally. After doing all this, Andy slowly turns into a zombie, but he keeps walking and walking. Meanwhile, the zombie clearance of the area by Thumi's tribe has been completed, and not long after that, they're surprised when they hear the sound of a baby crying. When they turn around, they see a very shocking sight. A strange figure appears before them when the smoke that envelopes them slowly begins to disappear. It turns out to be Andy, who has completely turned into a zombie, while carrying Rosie and Thumi under the guidance of rotting flesh. Eventually, Andy also succeeds in delivering his beloved daughter to the right people. Then, as a form of farewell, he is given the aroma of perfume from his wife, and finally, Andy's suffering is ended. Cargo movie ends with Rosie, who is now with Thumi's tribe, and eventually, the tribe members are very happy to see her. A tribe member accidentally finds the word "thank you" written in the child's stomach cavity as the father's last expression of love to his beloved daughter, as well as an expression of gratitude to the tribe that has adopted her. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notification so you don't miss the latest recaps.